Hello, everyone, and thank you for being here. My name is Alyssa Arnheim, and I'm host of the Healthy Gut, Happy Child Summit. Nourish your child, release their vitality, and watch them thrive. Our children are experiencing skyrocketing rates of autoimmune disease, allergies, autism, eczema, asthma, food sensitivities, behavioral issues, and more. And many of you know these issues can all be tied to the gut. Our kids are also in the first generation expected to live shorter lives than their parents, and this is totally unacceptable. So I've gathered the foremost experts in supporting children's gut health. They're giving you their specific strategies, experience-based wisdom, and the most progressive cutting-edge science in everything from food to medicine to lifestyle, so that you know exactly what to do to help your child thrive. And today I am so delighted and honored to be here with Dr. Jill Tieman. Hi.
Hi.
Dr. Jill Tieman is a clinical nutritionist and chiropractor. Her blog, realfoodforager.com, was born out of a desire to share critical information about problems in the food supply and their effects on the health of the American people. As a clinical nutritionist offering alternatives to conventional medicine, Dr. Tieman realized that the benefits of a real food diet would be far greater for many conditions than that of supplementation or mainstream nutrition advice. As the chapter leader of the Great South Bay chapter of the Weston Price Foundation, she is enthusiastic about teaching people how to use real wholesome foods to reinvigorate their health. Dr. Tieman has been featured on her local television show, Long Island Naturally, many times and has been interviewed at various online summits. She is the author of several grain-free paleo cookbooks and an online grain-free cooking class. And we'll get to those a little bit later. But right now, I would love to hear from you, Dr. Jill.
Mm-hmm.
How did you get into the grain-free world?
Well, my journey into grain-free eating actually emerged from the impassioned plea of a patient of mine because her young daughter was diagnosed with ulcerative colitis, and she was desperate to find a good nutritional protocol that would work for her. Mm-hmm. Her doctors insisted that diet had nothing to do with the condition. Can you imagine?
Wow.
But she was also a health advocate, and she wouldn't accept that. So she came to me to find the right diet for her sick child. Mm-hmm. And so I suggested the specific carbohydrate diet. And as hard as it was, they took it on. And they noticed a difference right away. The child had been delayed in her dental growth, 2-year delay. And she was also delayed in her growth and her weight for her age. She was 10. And after 1 month on the diet, she lost 8 baby teeth and she gained 6 pounds. And that was just after 1 month of eliminating all grains and most starches.
Wow.
Because she was finally absorbing nutrients.
Yeah.
And that convinced even her skeptical father that the diet would work. And so they continued with the diet.
Wow, what an awesome story.
Yeah, that's only one. I mean, it's like miraculous when you see sometimes it just takes 2 weeks for someone to see a big difference. And sometimes it takes longer than a month. It might take 6 weeks or 8 weeks. But once they see the difference, that really is motivating for them to continue with the diet.
Right.
And that's really, super important for them to start healing the gut and regaining their health. So I've seen so many people, whether it's the GAPS diet, the specific carbohydrate diet, mm-hmm. paleo, primal, autoimmune paleo, they're all slightly a little bit different, but right. they're all grain-free. And most of them are dairy-free. And these really help a wide range of health problems, from colitis to celiac disease, Crohn's, to food allergies, skin conditions, asthma, neurological and mood conditions, and learning problems. All of these diets can be applied for these conditions. So, and I started the blog because I realized that this was a blog was a good way for my patients to get this information. And then, of course, I have a larger reach of reaching a lot more people with the blog, with this kind of information.
Yeah, yeah. So can you tell us a little bit more about what exactly is harmful about grains?
Okay, sure. Well, first of all, I will say that not everybody reacts to gluten. It's really the gluten is the main thing, but all grains can also be a problem, and I'll talk about that. But not everybody reacts to gluten, but if they have a leaky gut, which I'll explain in a minute, they'll most likely react to gluten and all kinds of other foods too. Typically the most allergenic foods are wheat, dairy, and the casein in wheat, eggs, soy, fish or shellfish, tree nuts and peanuts. And those are the main foods that conventional medicine even recognizes that are highly allergenic for a type 1 kind of an allergy. But any of those healing diets will eliminate these foods right away. They'll eliminate other foods too, but these are the main highly allergenic foods that they will eliminate.
Yeah.
So let me just explain what leaky gut is before we go any further. This is a condition that when the lining of the intestine is not healthy or has been damaged, there are openings in the lining of the intestine, much like you would say a piece of cloth has a certain weave to it. And even though the space between each thread is teeny tiny, that's the way the lining of the gut is supposed to be. But when you have leaky gut, your gut is sort of more like cheesecloth almost, where the openings become much larger. And so what happens in that condition is food particles, large food particles, undigested food particles will get through the lining of the gut, will get into the bloodstream and cause the immune system to say, hey, wait a minute, you don't belong here. And they'll start an immune attack against the food particles. And this is how allergies develop, and this is how leaky gut gets worse, because then it becomes a vicious cycle of more damage to the lining of the gut, and the openings become larger, and so on and so forth. And so the immune system is continuously attacking what's going into the bloodstream from the gut.
Right.
So we also call leaky gut intestinal permeability. So those are terms that might be used. But to get back to allergies, for instance, conventional medicine will test for what we call IgE allergies, and those are the immediate allergies, and those foods I mentioned before are tested for. And that's the type of allergy where if you eat like a peanut and you get a hive or something worse, that's an immediate allergy. That's what conventional medicine tests for. However, the immune system has many different lines of reactivity. And for instance, there's also IgG allergies, which are delayed sensitivity allergies. And those are tested by kind of like alternative or integrative medicine labs. They're usually not, that type of allergy is not done by like a LabCorp or a Quest. And you really need to go to a doctor who knows where to send it for testing. But even those IgG tests are not exactly accurate all of the time. So the best way of testing for delayed food sensitivities is to just do an elimination diet. And these healing diets that I mentioned, GAPS, SCD, paleo, that's what they are. They're elimination diets. And then eventually when you're feeling better, you can one by one add a food group or a specific food back in to see if you have a reaction to it. The only thing with the delayed, it's called delayed because the reaction or the symptom you might get is delayed, and it can be delayed by hours or days. So then it becomes more difficult to identify, are you really reacting to this food or is it something else? So that's why when you're doing an elimination diet, it's very important to, when you reintroduce the food, to do that one food at a time and leave a few days in between. So it's a long process.
Yeah. That's a commitment. That's a big
that's a problem for people because they said, oh, we were tested for allergies. But if you went to a conventional allergist, then you were just tested for the immediate allergies. You weren't tested for the delayed allergies.
Mm-hmm.
And that can be a very significant part of the problem, the delayed allergies.
Right.
So to get back to leaky gut for a minute, what causes leaky gut? Well, it can be caused by a lot of things, such as damage to the microbiome. Damage can be from medications, particularly antibiotics, other medications like nonsteroidal anti-inflammatories, high blood pressure medication. Lots of medications can upset the microbiome in the intestine and then go on to cause leaky gut. We also have what's in the food supply causing leaky gut, and that the food supply has so many chemical additives, we don't even know half of what's in there. And also all the fake foods, all the processed foods that we have in the Western diet. All of these things contribute to leaky gut. And also our lifestyle, being too clean. There's something called the hygiene hypothesis, where we're actually cleaning ourselves into disease because we need the stimulation from bacteria and other organisms, and we've just gotten a little bit on the too clean side. Yeah. So all of these factors can contribute to leaky gut.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And let me just talk about the microbiome for a minute, because that's really exciting. The last 5 years have given us a truly amazing amount of research in this, because we now have the technology to do the DNA testing on bacteria. And that's when they discovered that there's actually more bacterial cells in our gut than cells in our body by times 10. That's what most people are saying, times 10. So we really have this new organ called the microbiome. It's in the gut. And it's composed of bacteria, fungus, viruses, and even helminths, which are worms. And worms are actually used therapeutically in some instances. But the microbiome has many purposes, and is very, very protective of human health, because the bacteria manufacture enzymes, they manufacture vitamins, short-chain fatty acids, which are so important for the colonic cells. And the microbiome needs to be nourished and nurtured. But instead, it's being damaged by our modern lifestyle and our modern food supply.
Yeah.
So go ahead.
Can you I love this. This is great. I want to get back to specifically the grain story.
Yeah.
Why have you left the grains behind, and why are all of these diets omitting grains?
Right. Okay.
How does it play into the microbiome and leaky gut?
Right. Okay. Well, there's many reasons to quit grains, and I'll enumerate some of them.
Okay.
First of all, and it's not in any order of importance really, because they're all good reasons. But all the grains, including nuts and legumes, are high in something called phytic acid or phytates. So phytic acid is an organic acid that's present in the bran and the hull of all seeds, and that includes grains and nuts and beans. And most people know that they're supposed to soak their beans. Otherwise, they're very difficult to digest, and you'll get a lot of gas and all of that. But most people don't know that nuts, seeds, and grains are also in the same category, and they really need to be soaked. But to get back to the phytic acid blocks the uptake of critical minerals like calcium, magnesium, copper, and zinc. And phytates have been studied extensively, and findings show that phytates, which is phytic acid, contribute to widespread mineral deficiencies in many third world countries. This is also happening in the West. And the analysis they came up with shows that calcium, magnesium, iron, and zinc are present in the plant foods eaten in they studied the third world countries, in those countries. But the high phytic acid content of their wheat, soy, and rice-based diet prevents the absorption. And I would say that the Western diet is also very high, is also a wheat, soy, and rice-based diet.
Yeah.
So we have that here too. So in order to remove the phytic acid in the grains, as well as the legumes, nuts, and seeds, you have to soak and or sprout the grains in a warm acidic solution. Mm-hmm. So what you would do is take your portion of say, wheat or rice or whatever you're using, and put it in a pot of water with water, and then add something like a little bit of yogurt, kefir, or even just lemon juice, something a little bit acidic, mm-hmm. and place it in a warm place overnight and just let it soak. And that will help remove the harmful phytic acid. Mm. Typically, nuts are soaked in a salt solution.
Okay.
So nuts are done a little bit differently, but they're soaked in salt. And then it could be rinsed and then put into a recipe or used, whatever. Mm-hmm. Of course, with nuts, you want to then dehydrate them because you don't want them laying around, wet.
Yeah.
So it's a whole procedure. On my blog, I have plenty of information about how to do that.
Okay. Awesome.
But soaking also decreases the enzyme inhibitors that are in unsoaked grains. Because you could leave grains on the counter for months or years and they don't disintegrate, they don't decay. The bacteria don't get to them because they're highly inaccessible. And when you eat something like that without preparing it properly, then your digestive system is not able to get to any of the nutrition inside there. So that's what's happening. The standard American diet is full of grains that are not properly prepared and have very little available nutrition. So we have many people who are overweight but starving for nutrients. And it's obvious in the skyrocketing rates of obesity in America today.
Yeah.
So if you look on most shelves, and even the organic breads in the health food store, they are not properly prepared. There are a few brands that do sprout the wheat and the grains, so those are better brands. Mm-hmm. Also with breads, the fermented bread, sourdough bread, but it has to be a traditional sourdough, and that will also take away all of these anti-nutrients that are in the grains.
Wow.
So it's a traditional way of preparing the grains that's really important to do if you're eating grains.
Yeah.
But, for someone who's got a digestive or an autoimmune condition or any kind of disease going on, it's best really to allow the gut to heal and not have any grains at all.
So let's talk a little bit about that. What kinds of conditions have you seen healed by eliminating grains and giving the digestive system a chance to recover? How does this play out?
Well, I would say that any condition would benefit from going grain-free, even for a limited time. Mm-hmm. Because most conditions are based upon inflammation. Inflammation is arguably the basis of many diseases. Mm-hmm. And grains have several inflammatory substances, such as the phytic acid that I mentioned, as well as gluten. It's very highly inflammatory because there's an immune reaction. Gluten is a protein, and there's an immune reaction to it for many people. And then there's also something called lectins, which I'll talk about in a second. But grains also promote an acidic pH in the body, which drives inflammation as well. So glutens, they're a protein. The immune system will react against proteins. And they could be problematic for many people because even if they may not even know it, because you may not even get a digestive complaint being gluten intolerant. And the same with celiac disease. Some celiac people go undiagnosed for years and years and years, but they have other symptoms. They have joint pain, they have headaches or migraines, they have a skin condition, and it's all coming from the gut. But they're, because of the way Western medicine looks at things, they don't look at the holistic approach. It's all sectioned out into specialties.
Right.
so they may not pick it up. But I mentioned lectins, and that's another substance in grains that disrupts the digestion and the assimilation of nutrients. Studies suggest that lectins may play a role in promoting many inflammatory conditions, inflammatory bowel disease, Crohn's and colitis, diabetes, rheumatoid arthritis, psoriasis, multiple sclerosis, infertility, allergies, autoimmune problems. Yeah, I mean, really, it could be the basis of almost anything.
Yeah.
And I think we're going to come to realize that.
Yeah.
It'll become more of a standard of care.
And how great that healing is so accessible.
Yeah, how great is that?
Yeah, right here. Doable for anyone. So can you talk just a little bit about beans also? You include beans in this category that has, included in this category are beans that are also seeds that are trying to protect themselves from sprouting on your countertop.
Right.
How do beans fit into the big picture here?
Well, most of the healing diets will eliminate beans initially. The specific carbohydrate diet and the GAPS diet allow, I think it's white navy beans, to come back in when a person feels well and they want to introduce beans back in. So, not all beans are bad. They should be properly prepared. I think with a really long soak and cooked really well.
How long is a long soak? And do you want?
I would say, 12 to 24 hours.
Okay.
With some rinsing in between. I mean, that's how I would do beans in particular. I don't really eat beans. I really never went back into it. But, I mean, some people just do fine with it, just as long as they're prepared well,
Right.
Yeah. But, to go back to why we should quit grains, I have a few more reasons.
Yeah, please. Tell us everything.
So another reason is that grains disrupt proper sugar regulation, and people think that because they're eating whole grains, that's much healthier. But in fact, whole grains are harder to digest than refined grains. So, whole wheat bread, compared to white bread, that's actually white bread is easy to digest because it doesn't have the hull and the bran and all the anti-nutrients which are in the hull and the bran of the grain. So, and people also think that because it's a whole grain, it's not as high on the glycemic index, which is a measure of how quickly a food goes to become sugar. Because, I mean, eventually everything becomes the most basic element, and any carbohydrate like grain is going to become sugar. But the grains, whether they're whole or refined, actually become sugar very, very quickly, much like a candy bar. So if you're eating a piece of bread without anything on it, for instance, or some crackers without anything on it, that's going to be digested, and it starts in the mouth with salivary amylase. That's going to become sugar very, very quickly, so, and a lot of these snack foods are all pretty much 100% carbohydrate.
Yeah.
So, you continue to eat this way for a long time, and you're really looking at diabetes down the road.
Yeah.
Because you've had so many insulin spikes.
Yeah.
So, our whole culture is so grain-based, it's very hard to find snacks and foods just to grab that aren't totally carbohydrate.
Yeah. And you've written several cookbooks about this. Can you tell us just a little bit about the different resources that we have, the books that you've written?
Well, I have 3 books on Amazon, Kindle books, but you can read them on any device. And it's just grain-free breads, grain-free snacks, grain-free paleo breads, grain-free paleo snacks, and grain-free paleo desserts and treats. And I use, everything is appropriate for healing diets for those books. Specific carbohydrate, GAPS diet, paleo diet, diet, the AIP paleo, autoimmune paleo, they're not appropriate for that because they remove eggs, and I use a lot of eggs in the baking.
Okay.
But you know, I mean, there's tons of ways you can get around this and make some very delicious things that even people who don't need a diet will love, you know.
Right. Yeah, it's just really delicious.
So yeah, so I have those books on Kindle, and I have 2 more PDF books that you can access through my website. One is about broths, beyond broth, and one is about how to heal your microbiome and optimize your health.
Oh.
And that kind of is a lot more in depth in what I'm actually talking about today, and some of the things I'm talking about today.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing all that about your books and resources online.
Yeah. So to get back to the grains, as I kind of mentioned before, that improperly prepared grains can cause damage to the gut lining, and that's exactly what they do in a susceptible person. If and I mentioned this before, but just to reiterate, if the food is not broken down properly because it hasn't been properly prepared, it's not digestible to the human body. The large food molecules are released into the bloodstream. The immune system reacts to them and initiates an immune reaction, and that's highly inflammatory. And that can be very damaging to the delicate gut lining. And this is how leaky gut develops. So again, if all these offending foods are continuously eaten, it's a vicious cycle of immune reactions and gut damage. And eventually symptoms are going to start, and eventually, you know, an autoimmune disease or some other disease process is going to be going along.
And it seems that as long as you're perpetuating this cycle where you have a leaky gut and inflammation, it seems like you're prone to adding more and more and more food sensitivities as different food proteins are getting through and getting tagged as the enemy by your immune system. We have experienced that downward cycle in my family where suddenly there are so many food sensitivities, and it's not fun. But it's recoverable. You can recover from it.
Right. And interestingly, in my experience of doing a lot of the IgG, the delayed allergy testing in my practice, I've noticed that, and when I talk to the patient, I've noticed that people will test positive for everything they're eating, you know, and that to me indicates, you know, that they have leaky gut.
Yeah.
And it's never going to stop, and it's only going to get worse.
Right.
And some people come in with, you know, they can eat 5 foods, you know, and so what can I do? I can only eat 5 foods. Well, what we really need to do is heal the gut and get you on the right foods that'll help you heal the gut, and take away the foods that are getting in the way of your healing, and then continue from there. And that's what we do.
And then they can add back in those foods once their gut is healed.
Absolutely. You know, I mean, some people can never really add back in gluten, and maybe should never do that. Maybe they'll never eat any grains at all. But they'll at least be able to assimilate all of the good food that they've come to start eating.
Yes.
Certainly, life is certainly doable without grains.
There are so many foods out there beyond grains.
Yeah.
It's hard to believe when you eat bread every day and when you've built your diet around wheat and dairy. And it seems insurmountable, but those are just 2 foods of a bajillion things out there that are so delicious.
It is a matter of mindset. Also, I found with people that, you know, you really have to be willing to go the mile to do whatever it takes. I remember when I had to start dealing with this with patients and with my own son. He had to go grain-free, and I was even I, who I was open to as a nutritionist, I was okay, I'll do whatever it takes. But I was like, oh my God, what are we going to eat? You know, and it's really a shocker. It really is. But you know, you have to like just get your mind in the right mindset that you can do this, and lots of people have done it before you. And now, I mean, when I started, you know, 13 years ago with this, there wasn't a lot of information. That's why I got into this, and that's why I built up the blog and did my class, so that people wouldn't have to reinvent the wheel, that it's really not that hard. And now, years later, we have so many resources for this.
Yeah, we really do. And we'll get back to, you have another fantastic resource available. But before we go in that direction, let's talk a little bit about grains and teeth. We had some great conversation earlier about this, and I really want...
Okay. I just want to finish one last point about the wheat.
Yeah.
And that is that the wheat is no longer the wheat of our ancestors. It's a very different product right now.
Yeah.
Grains came on the scene about 10,000 years ago, which is the blink of an eye in evolutionary standards. And our digestive systems have not adapted to this newcomer. We're much better at eating traditional foods such as meat, fat, vegetables, and fruits. The wheat has been genetically manipulated. It's been hybridized over the years, and the DNA codes are totally different today. So this is a totally different food, and many people have not adapted to it. Now, importantly, all non-organically grown wheat is subject to tons of pesticides, specifically Monsanto's Roundup. Now, this Roundup product has herbicide glyphosate in it, which is used to kill weeds. However, they use glyphosate sprayed on the wheat on the last few days before the harvest in order to dry it out. So that's even more pesticide residues on the product, on the wheat product. And glyphosate is absolutely devastating to the human gut lining and to that of the animals that are actually fed the genetically modified soy and corn. Those animals are sick animals because they have, a damaged leaky gut right there. Yes. So conventional wheat products can really be poison for some people. Literally, there's literally poison on them if they're not organic.
Right.
And I would say just avoid them to stay healthy. Better yet, go grain-free.
Yeah.
So, you want to talk about
grain and teeth?
Yeah. Okay.
Just a little bit.
Okay. Well, I could talk for a long time about it. But
go for it.
Here we go. If you think about it, the mouth is the portal to the entire digestive system. Mm-hmm. And the mouth has its own microbiome, which we're learning about. And when that's out of balance, that's going to cause tooth decay, gum inflammation, also known as gingivitis or periodontitis. Now, the dentist office can be the greatest source of pain relief, but also can be a great source of toxic exposure. For instance, dentists love to give children fluoride treatments at every visit. But fluoride is actually a poison and doesn't belong in drinking water, and it doesn't belong in the mouth. Fluoride is harmful to the microbes that live on the teeth, and it damages the way the body makes energy, teeth, bone, and blood. It increases the mineral content, but it lowers the tensile strength of bone, and it gets into the marrow and lowers the blood cell count, wreaking havoc with the bone cell production and the strength of the bones in the teeth. In 2012, published in Environmental Health Perspectives, researchers conducted a systemic review, like a meta-analysis of a total study of all the studies ever done, to investigate the effects of increased fluoride exposure and delayed neurobehavioral development. So delayed development in a child. And this had never been addressed before. And they found that children in high fluoride areas had significantly lower IQ scores than those who lived in the low fluoride areas. Yeah, so that was back in 2012, and hopefully they're doing more studies about that now.
Yeah.
Fluoride is actually a hazardous waste product of the aluminum industry and the phosphate fertilizer industry. These companies needed a cheap way to get rid of this groundwater pollutant, and it's illegal. It's illegal to dump this waste into rivers and lakes or release the parent gases into the atmosphere, but they're allowed to dump it into our water supply and give it to children on their teeth. Does that make sense?
No.
No, not at all.
Wow.
In 2006, the CDC and the American Dental Association finally admitted that infant formula mixed with fluoridated water increases the child's risk for developing enamel fluorosis.
Wow.
Yeah. And if anybody out there wants to find out the fluoridation status of your water, call your local water authority and ask for the water quality report,
Mm-hmm.
and you'll get a full report of the many things in your own municipal water.
Right. Wow. Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah. And, children are most at risk for fluoride consumption. They're more delicate than we are.
Yeah.
And the same amount given to adult may not be toxic, but it is to a child.
Yeah.
So adding it to the water supply and encouraging all this use in dental products like toothpaste, mouthwash, and the fluoride treatments, they're really subject to overuse
Mm-hmm.
of overexposure to fluoride.
Yeah.
Children don't know how to spit that well, and they could be swallowing the toothpaste.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a very good website called fluoridealert.org.
Mm-hmm.
And they talk about the lethal dose of fluoride, the fact that there's a lethal dose of fluoride in just 40% of a standard family-sized tube of toothpaste for a 40-pound child. So,
Wow.
I mean, if your child goes and wants to eat the toothpaste, it can be very, very dangerous for them.
My goodness.
So the main sources of fluoride toxicity are water, if you have it in your water supply,
Mm-hmm.
the oral hygiene products, toothpaste, mouthwash, fluoride treatments at the dentist.
Mm-hmm.
Fluoride is in some medications.
Mm-hmm.
And you also, non-organic foods can be a source because of the pesticide cryolite is actually sodium aluminum fluoride.
Hmm.
So you could be actually getting it from non-organic produce
Interesting.
if they're using that particular pesticide on it.
Wow. Wow. That was a whole lot of startling information. Thank you.
Yeah, there's actually more if you want to hear a little bit more.
Sure. And then I want to hear this, and I want to hear about the grains too.
Mm-hmm. Well, in children, when you see fluorosis, it's because of the overuse of fluoride,
Uh-huh.
and because of the fluoride taking the place of certain other minerals. There's no hard enamel, and so the teeth will pick up stains from whatever food they're eating.
Right.
So that's why the teeth will look that way when they have fluorosis. And with fluorosis, studies have shown there can also be the neurological impairment and the lower IQ.
Mm-hmm.
And 4 out of 10 children, or 41% of children in the U.S., actually show damage to their teeth. In 1998, it was only 22%. So, it's only getting worse.
Yeah.
And also, there's been a lot of research about the association of hip fractures resulting from too much fluoride.
Wow.
So, and that would be for older adults, hip fractures, which can be devastating, actually.
Right. Oh, yeah.
And fluoride, let's not forget that fluoride can negatively affect the thyroid gland by displacing iodine.
Mm-hmm.
Same line on the periodic table, and could easily replace iodine.
Mm-hmm.
And just to mention a couple of medications, Ritalin and Prozac have fluoride in them.
Oh, wow.
Many other drugs do too. And European countries do not fluoridate their water. Europe is a little bit smarter than us here in the West.
Mm.
So what actually causes tooth decay is really what you want to ask.
Yeah.
And obviously eating sugar, leaving sugar and food residues on the teeth,
Mm-hmm.
and the bacteria Streptococcus mutans. And actually studies have shown that fluoride is not particularly lethal towards Strep mutans, which is the bacteria that causes dental cavities.
Right.
Wow. So, and then the fluoride treatments actually cause a very high rise in the blood levels of fluoride,
Mm-hmm.
especially in children.
Yeah.
So you really have to think about that.
Right.
And there are, going away from fluoride, there are a couple of other things that can happen at the dentist that,
Mm-hmm.
especially with children, you want to be very careful about. And one of them is the excessive dental x-rays. Now, I remember when my pediatric dentist, he wanted to take x-rays every 6 months.
Wow.
You know, they only take three,
Right.
but still, every 6 months, you know, I mean, you don't want to have this kind of ionizing radiation exposure when a good dentist and hygienist can look in the mouth and see if there are cavities. That's how they used to do it, you know. And if you practice good hygiene, you're not going to get the cavities.
Right. So I'm wondering if you can describe a little bit, you mentioned some of the premise of the Weston Price Foundation. And I thought maybe it would be nice to share what this group is all about with our audience, because they're a pretty fantastic resource.
Yeah, they're a fantastic resource. And I had been a nutritionist and chiropractor for many, many years, and I was kind of doing whatever nutrition I was taught was like alternative nutrition, but it was still the low fat, you know, grain-based kind of diet. And then I got in touch with the Weston Price Foundation, and I went to one of the seminars, their conference, their yearly conference, and I felt like I had come home. It was like, oh my goodness, what they're talking about here is so amazing. And what were they talking about? They were talking about eating real food, getting your food from a local farmer, you know, so you're supporting the local economy. Don't eat any additives. I mean, I was already into that, you know, not eating any additives or anything. Drinking raw milk, which, you know, but of course it comes from a farmer who's farming biodynamically and has the cow on pasture, and it's a very clean, healthy cow, you know, all of those things. And then the whole thing about fats, you know, they're very supportive of good, healthy fats, which was a major breakthrough for me in my diet and in the diet of my family and my patients and everything. Just understanding the difference between what are the good fats, what are the bad fats, and you know, they are really concerned about the children, and so am I, and so are you, and that's why you're having the summit. And I think they are a good, very basic foundational foundation or, you know, group to be involved in. And I would encourage everyone to go to their website, westonaprice.org, and get information from them. I mean, I base a lot of my information on information I get from them. So,
wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing. Thank you so much for sharing about that. And also, I want to hear a little bit about your free offer for our entire audience, Beyond Broth, Nourishing Homemade Paleo Soups.
Actually, the free offer, I switched that.
Oh, you did?
I did. Something I think might be more valuable. It's actually two things. It's it's a small grain-free recipe book. There's just a handful of recipes in it, but it can get you started. Perfect. To see if you, it's some of my favorite recipes that are easy to make. And it can get someone started on their grain-free journey, just to see if they can do it, which I'm sure they can.
Yes.
Also, it's an email series. I'll email you like 9 or 10 emails. And I'll talk about how you can start changing over your diet to a real food diet, and I'll explain all about the good fats and, again, much more in depth of what we talked about today, but more about grains. And I mean, the Weston Price Foundation does support grains, but properly preparing them or using sourdough, you know, sprouted grains. You know, but for me, I went grain-free, but also the emails, you know, will just give you each time, one is about sugar, one's about fat, one's about fermented foods, eating fermented foods to help populate your gut with good beneficial bacteria as you're going along in the healing process. So it's a lot of really good information. Perfect. So that's my free gift.
And you have a really fantastic special offer for us.
Mhm.
Can you tell us all a little bit about that too?
Well, I mentioned a little earlier, I have an online video class called Go Grain Free, and that has over 80 videos and over 150 recipes for all grain-free cooking. So there's 12 lessons, but it's self-paced. You can access any lesson at any time that you want. You could do it in the middle of the night, once you sign up. Um, a chapter on a lesson on all breakfast, and there's like in each lesson there's like, I don't know, 12 to 15 recipes
Mm-hmm.
probably, and half of those are videos, so you can actually see. When I was first getting into this, I was always worried, oh boy, is this batter right? Is it going to cook right? Because I didn't want to waste all this good food that I was adding in as the ingredients.
Right.
And the videos are really helpful in showing you exactly what it's supposed to look like and how it's supposed to come out.
Oh.
And I think it's really, people have just said how helpful it is.
Yeah.
So there's a whole thing about breakfast. So if you really have to do a lot with carbs, there's pancakes and waffles and breads and muffins and rolls and wraps and, there's all kinds of that. But there's also grain-free cooking is, how do you make a gravy and how do you make something breaded? There's a lot of good real food recipes that are simple, because the problem is a lot of people don't really know how to cook. And when they come to having to do this diet, not only is this a major change in the way you're eating,
Mm-hmm.
but it's like an incredible change because you have to start cooking.
Yeah.
And you also need to learn how to cook efficiently,
Mm-hmm.
cooking in bulk. And I talk about a lot of this in the class.
Oh, excellent. Excellent. And I know you're fantastic at bread substitutes, and a sandwich is really convenient. So I'm all about the bread alternatives.
Yeah.
Oh,
There's plenty of breads, and it's not going to be the same kind of bread that you're used to. There's no gluten in it, so it doesn't hold together as well. It doesn't go as high because there's no yeast in it.
mm-hmm.
But you develop a taste for any of this stuff, and it's a workaround.
Oh yeah.
It becomes, these breads are great. I love them.
Oh, thank you so much. This is so much fun hearing about everything you've been working on and all of your expertise. And I really appreciate everything you're sharing. I have one question. Well, I have two questions that we usually wrap up with. And one of them is if out of everything we've covered in this awesome interview, if someone took only one piece of information, what do you think it would be?
Okay. Well, I think that if somebody is really interested in healing leaky gut and getting onto a healthier diet, I think going to the Weston Price Foundation
Mm-hmm.
is an important move for them.
Mm-hmm.
Because there they'll get a lot of this information, a lot more information, and I would also like to say go to my blog because I take a lot of that information and make it very easy to apply. So
excellent.
Thank
you. And what is something you're grateful for?
Again, here, I'm grateful for the Weston Price Foundation because they, years ago, they really put me on the road for what I call real nutrition. Because, I was kind of practicing clinical nutrition, but it was all about supplements. And when I went to that conference for the first time, I walked into the vendor area and it was all food vendors. And in any of my nutrition conferences, which I went to many of them, it was all supplement vendors. Now, I'm not against supplements. I think there are certain supplements that are really good. But I walked in there and I said, wow, this really is all about the food, and I'm going to really learn a lot. So I'm very grateful for them.
Wow, beautiful. Oh, well, thank you so much for everything you have shared. This has been really enlightening and rich speaking with you. And and I want to remind everybody that all of these interviews are free this week, and I hope you can watch as many of them as you're interested in. And the entire series is available for purchase if you want to have this forever and share it with your friends or family at any time. And thank you everyone so much for being here and sharing and learning all of this information with me. And thank you again, Dr. Jill Tieman, pardon me. It's been great.
Thank you.